Hi, friends. Welcome back for another Read Aloud. Okay, so we're on chapter 45, and Stanley and Zero have just found a treasure box inside of the hole where Stanley found the gold tube. Unfortunately, as soon as they pulled the treasure box out, guess who shows up? The warden. She shines a flashlight on them and says, "Thank you. You found it for me," basically. So we got to see what happens next. Is she going to try to steal the treasure box from them? Who gets the treasure box, anyways? Just because they found it, do they get to keep it? We'll have to see. Chapter 45. The beam of the flashlight was directed away from Stanley's eyes and onto Zero, who was sitting on his knees. The suitcase was on his lap. Mr. Pendanski was holding the flashlight. Mr. Sir stood next to him with his gun drawn and pointed in the same direction. Mr. Sir was barefoot and bare-chested, wearing only his pajama bottoms. The warden moved toward Zero. She was also in her bedclothes, wearing an extra-long t-shirt. Unlike Mr. Sir, however, she had on her boots. Mr. Pendanski was the only one fully dressed. Perhaps he had been on guard duty. Off in the distance, Stanley could see two more flashlights bobbing toward them in the darkness. He felt helpless down in the hole. "You boys arrived just in the nick," the warden started to say. She stopped talking and stopped walking. Then she slowly backed away. A lizard had crawled up on top of the suitcase. Its big red eyes glowed in the beam of the flashlight. Its mouth was open, and Stanley could see its white tongue moving in and out between its black teeth. Zero sat as still as a statue. A second lizard crawled up over the side of the suitcase and stopped less than an inch away from Zero's little finger. Stanley was afraid to look and afraid not to. He wondered if he should try to scramble out of the hole before the lizards turned on him, but he didn't want to cause any commotion. The second lizard crawled across Zero's fingers and halfway up his arm. It occurred to Stanley that the lizards were probably on the suitcase when he handed it to Zero. "There's another one!" gasped Mr. Pendanski. He shined his flashlight on the box of frosted flakes, which lay on its side beside Stanley's hole. A lizard was crawling out of it. The light also illuminated Stanley's hole. He glanced downward and had to force himself to suppress a scream. He was standing in a lizard's nest. He felt the scream explode inside of him. He could see 6 lizards. There were 3 on the ground, 2 on his feet, and 1 on his right sneaker. He tried to remain very still. Something was crawling up the back of his neck. So these are those yellow spotted lizards. Very, very, very deadly. 3 other counselors approached the area. Stanley heard one saying, "What's going?" and then whispered, "Oh my God." "What do we do?" asked Mr. Pendanski. "We wait," said the warden. "It won't be very long." "At least we'll have a body to give to that woman," said Mr. Pendanski. She's going to ask a lot of questions," said Mr. Sir, "and this time she'll have the Attorney General with her." "Let her ask her questions," said the warden, "just so long as I have the suitcase. I don't care what happens. Do you know how long I've—" Her voice trailed off, then started up again. "When I was little, I'd watch my parents dig holes every weekend and holiday. When I got bigger, I had to dig, even on Christmas." Stanley felt tiny claws dig into the side of his face as the lizard pulled itself off his neck and pushed up past his chin. "It won't be long now," the warden said. Stanley could hear his heart beat. Each beat told him he was still alive, at least for one more second. They're in a lot of trouble right now. They're covered in these yellow spotted lizards and they can't move because these things are deadly. They think if they move, it's going to try to bite them. And then the warden, like she says, it won't be long now until they die. So she's just waiting for one of those lizards to bite them so she can go and grab that suitcase. It also seems like she's got some pressure because she said that this woman has been showing up to the camp, probably asking about what happened to Stanley, what happened to Zero. So she's feeling this pressure from these lawyers to say, what's been going on? How come these boys are missing? So at least if they get bit by a lizard, she can say, they just got bit by a lizard. So she'll have an excuse. Chapter 46. This one's another short one. 5 seconds later, his heart was still beating. Mr. Pendanski screamed. The lizard, which had been in the cereal box, was jumping toward him. Mr. Sir shot it in midair. Pew! Stanley felt the blast shatter the air around him. The lizards scurried around frantically across his very still body. He did not flinch. A lizard ran across his closed mouth. Ooh! He glanced at Zero, and Zero's eyes met his. Somehow they were both still alive, at least for one more second, one more heartbeat. Maybe we should just shoot them, suggested Mr. Pendanski. Who? Asked the counselor. The lizards or the kids? Mr. Pendanski laughed grimly. The kids are going to die anyway. He laughed again. At least we got plenty of graves to choose from. We've got time, asked the warden. I've waited this long and I can wait another few. Her voice trailed off. Stanley felt a lizard crawl in and out of his pocket. We're going to keep our story simple, said the warden. That woman's going to ask a lot of questions. The attorney general will most likely initiate an investigation. So this is what happened. Stanley tried to run away in the middle of the night, fell in a hole, and the lizards got him. That's it. We're not even going to give them Zero's body. As far as anybody knows, Zero doesn't exist. Like Mom said, we got plenty of graves to choose from. So their plan is just to lie. When people come around asking what happened to Stanley, they're just going to lie. And they're not even going to tell them about Zero because they think nobody cares. That's pretty messed up, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. Let's see. Why would he run away if he knew he was going to get released today, though? Asked Mr. Pendanski. Who knows? He's crazy. That's why we couldn't release him yesterday. He was delirious, and we had to keep watch over him so he wouldn't hurt himself or anybody else. She's not going to like that, said Mr. Pendanski. She's not going to like anything we tell her, said the warden. She stared at Zero and the suitcase. Why aren't you dead yet? She asked. Stanley only half listened to the talk of the counselors. He didn't know who that woman was or what attorney general meant. He didn't even realize they were people. It just sounded like just people that he didn't know. His mind was too focused on the tiny claws that moved up and down his skin and through his hair. He tried to think about other things. He didn't want to die with the images of the warden, Mr. Sir, and the lizards etched into his brain. Instead, he tried to see his mother's face. His brain took him back to a time when he was very little, all bundled up in a snowsuit. He and his mother were walking hand in hand, mitten in mitten, when they both slipped on some ice and fell and rolled down a snow-covered hillside. They ended up on the bottom of the hill. He remembered he almost cried, but instead he laughed. His mother laughed too. He could feel the same light-headed feeling he felt then, dizzy from rolling down the hill. He felt the sharp coldness of the snow against his ear. He could see flecks of snow on his mother's bright and cheery face. This was where he wanted to be when he died. "Hey, caveman, guess what?" said Mr. Sir. "You're innocent after all. I thought you'd like to know that. Your lawyer came to get you yesterday. Too bad you weren't here." The words meant nothing to Stanley, who was still in the snow. He and his mother climbing back up the hill and rolling down again, this time on purpose. Later, they had hot chocolate with lots of melted marshmallows. So he's just thinking about this nice memory because he thinks that his time is very short. He thinks he's going to die. So he thinks, I don't want to see Mr. Sir and think about all this bad stuff in my last moment. He wants a nice memory. "It's getting close to 4:30, said Mr. Pendanski. "They'll be waking up." The warden told the counselors to return to their tents. She told them to give the campers breakfast and to make sure they didn't talk to anyone. As long as they were told, they didn't have to dig any more holes. If they talked, they would be severely punished. "How should we say they will be punished?" one of the counselors asked. "Let them use their imaginations," said the warden. Stanley watched the counselors return to the tents, leaving only the warden and Mr. Sir behind. He knew the warden didn't care whether the campers dug any more holes or not. She'd found what she was looking for, the treasure. He glanced at Zero. A lizard was perched on his shoulder. Zero remained perfectly still except for his right hand, which slowly formed into a fist. Then he raised his thumb, giving Stanley a thumbs-up sign. Stanley thought back to what Mr. Sir had said to him earlier, and the little bits of conversation he'd overheard. He tried to make sense out of it. Mr. Sir had said something about a lawyer, but Stanley knew his parents couldn't afford a lawyer. His legs were sore from remaining still for so long. Standing still was more strenuous, more tough than walking. He slowly allowed himself to lean against the side of the hole. The lizards didn't seem to mind. Chapter 47. Only a couple chapters left. We're really getting to the end here. You can feel the action is just right at the peak of this story. They're still down in the hole, but now they're covered in lizards and they can't move. What's going to happen next? Are they going to die? Is something going to happen? Are they going to just get out of the hole somehow? How can they possibly get out? I don't know. Maybe you can make a prediction. This is a tough one. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video.